Friend, can I tell you something I wish someone had told me earlier on? So, for years, I struggled. Like, I was just waiting for this magical moment where everything would just click. I thought one day I would just wake up and suddenly know exactly what I wanted to do with my life. I thought I'd know which career path I was supposed to have, who my people were, or just what kind of life I wanted to build. I kept thinking that somewhere along the way, this feeling of certainty would just arrive. And it never did. Instead, I felt like I was spinning my wheels. The harder I tried to answer those really big life questions, the more overwhelming it became. It was almost like I felt like I was just digging myself deeper into uncertainty because every answer seemed to create three more questions. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've been asking yourself, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? What do I even want anymore? How do I move forward? Or just where do I even begin? Those are heavy questions. And the truth is, our minds don't always know what to do with questions that big. So today, instead of trying to answer all of them, I want to share a practice that completely changed the way I thought about my future. It didn't magically give me all of the answers, but it gave me somewhere gentle to begin. So, grab your favorite drink and maybe a snack. Let's talk about it. Hello, and welcome to Torches, Yoga and Mindfulness. I'm Lauren, and I'll be your coach. If you're curious about mindfulness, healing, and practical habits that actually work, you're in the right place. Here we focus on simple but powerful practices grounded in ancient wisdom and modern science to care for both our mind and body. So make sure you hit the like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. So, this month, we are going to be talking about becoming more grounded because I feel like that advice is just kind of thrown around all the time, but there isn't much direction on how we do that. In the workshop video posted just before this one this week, we talked about listening to what our bodies are trying to tell us and about slowing down long enough to notice what we're carrying instead of constantly trying to fix ourselves. And now I want to build on that conversation. Once we become more aware of where we are, it's natural for the next question to slip in, like, now what? That's where a lot of us get stuck. Like my younger self thought we needed to figure out the next 20 years before we could even handle the next 20 minutes. But that's not really how life works. Our lives aren't usually changed by one giant decision, but by thousands of tiny ones. And every one of those little decisions is easier when we have some sense of direction, not certainty, just a little direction. There's actually some really interesting neuroscience behind this too. Our brains are prediction machines. Every second of every day, they are trying to answer questions like, what happens next? Is this safe? What should I expect? It's how our brains help us navigate the world efficiently. But when the future feels completely blank or impossible or overwhelming, our minds don't simply sit there patiently waiting for clarity. It's going to start trying to fill in the blanks. And sometimes that's where fear can creep in. Our inner critic chimes in with every worst possible case scenario in vivid detail. But if we try to picture a hopeful future, we come up blank. And I don't think that's because we're gloomy or cynical. I think it's because we've spent so much time preparing for danger that we haven't actually practiced imagining peace. For me, somewhere in my early 20s, I realized I was asking a question that was just too big. I was spinning my wheels on what do I do with my life? How do I get to a life I want instead of this one where I just felt lost and like I had no choices? And no matter how hard I would try to plan, my brain would never come up with helpful answers for those. It was almost like asking someone to describe an entire forest while they're standing in the middle of it. You just can't see it. So one day, I tried something a little different. Instead of trying to figure out my entire future, I got curious about future Lauren. Not some perfect version of me or ultra successful, just my future self, and something pretty cool happened. I didn't try to force an image or sit there and try to invent an ideal version of myself. I just got quiet and noticed what naturally appeared. And without the pressures I was putting on myself, without the ideas of what I should be for others, this image of future Lauren came to mind. And I took mental note of what clothes she wore, her expression, the way she stood, and even what was in the background behind her. And I was a little surprised that the image that came to mind wasn't just some polished version of my current life. Like the background was different, things were different. And she wasn't overly tanned, which, if you live in Florida, you know can actually mean something about maybe what type of work I was doing or how I was spending my free time. It told me she wasn't spending every spare moment trying to look a certain way or chase an image. She was spending more time living than performing. There were all these tiny observations, nothing dramatic or flashy, but somehow they felt true. And that became my list. Not a list of goals, just what I saw that felt right. Almost like I had met someone for coffee and just written down what I noticed about them afterwards. After this reflection and experience, I didn't walk away thinking, like, okay, now I have to just transform myself into that image by the end of the week. But every now and then, I'd ask myself a really simple question. What would future Lauren probably choose here? Not every time. I was still true to who I was at that moment, but I would consider that future Lauren, that image, and maybe if she would apply for the opportunity or continue to spend time with people who made her feel small. Would she stay in situations that only drained her, or would she speak to herself the way I was speaking to me now? Little by little, those questions started changing my decisions. Not because I was having to perform and pretend to be someone different or someone I wasn't, but because I was practicing becoming somebody I already believed I could be. And I think that's an important distinction. I think sometimes we hear the phrase like future self, and it can sound like we're trying to become someone completely different. But I don't see it that way. I think future us is still us, just someone who has practiced certain habits, learned certain lessons, maybe healed wounds, and definitely trusted ourselves for a little longer. They're not another person, they're simply farther down the path. So, if you're somewhere comfortable, try this with me. You don't have to close your eyes if you don't want to, but just let your attention soften for a moment. Take one slow breath in, and as you exhale, imagine meeting yourself a few years from now. This version isn't perfection or flawless, just a version of you that feels deeply at home in their own life, in their own skin. If you can't conjure an image of this future self in your mind's eye, try to notice any feelings that come with the thought of that version of you. Boundaries, ideas, principles. What is the first thing that you notice? Not something they have accomplished, just what do you notice? How do they carry themselves? How do they greet others? How do they speak to themselves when something goes wrong? What does their morning routine look like? Who do they spend their time with? What makes them laugh? And what have they stopped apologizing for? None of these questions require us to know a job title or where we'll live or exactly what our future will look like. We're simply getting to know someone we'd like to slowly grow towards. Take another slow breath in, noticing, feeling, and observing what came up. All right, before you step away from this exercise, consider for a moment, what is one thing you could do today or this week to embody an aspect of that future self you're meeting now? Maybe the future version wasn't burnt out. She takes a break when she's tired. Maybe they weren't overwhelmed because they've learned that just because he can handle everything doesn't mean he has to, and he can ask for help carrying the load. All right, friend, that's the practice. If you closed your eyes, go ahead and flutter them back open and join me in this space. So, one thing I realized after doing this exercise is that I didn't need a 5-year plan. I just needed some breadcrumbs on the trail. These tiny little reminders of who I was becoming or who I am still becoming. And it starts little. The little moment to moment decisions and actions we take, and just the simple ways we choose to conduct ourselves throughout the regular days. Maybe future you takes a walk after dinner, or read something instead of scrolling. Maybe in the future version, there are fresh flowers in the house, or they make time to call a friend, spend time doing things they enjoy. Maybe they pause before they react or laugh a little harder. Those aren't life goals, they're invitations and directions our brains can actually follow. Because our lives are rarely changed in giant leaps, they're changed by the little choices we make on an ordinary Tuesday, by hundreds of quiet moments that no one else ever really sees. Friend, one of the kindest things we can do for ourselves is stop expecting clarity to arrive all at once. We probably aren't going to have some life changing vision that just automatically changes our life situations, our motivations, directions, and dreams. But we can move in a way that helps things come together as we move forward instead of feeling like they're falling apart or like we have to grasp them and clinch with every bit of energy we have for fear that things will just fall apart if we let go. We're not going to discover ourselves by sitting still, waiting for all the answers to just come. We discover ourselves by becoming curious enough to take one small step at a time toward the person we're slowly getting to know. And something I've learned, we don't become that future version, that future us overnight. You're not some trendy breakfast that you can prep in the evening and wake up fully formed. We get curious, we get familiar. One conversation at a time, one boundary at a time, one walk, one difficult choice, or one act of kindness towards ourselves at a time. And then one day, before we can fully realize it, we look around at our ordinary life and think, wait a second. I remember imagining this. I remember when things felt scattered, hectic, lost, or just not right, and imagining this version of my future. And that doesn't mean everything gets perfect or that every plan works out and every dream comes true. It means somewhere along the way, all of those little choices quietly became the life we were building. All right. I would love to know what's one thing you noticed about your future you today. Not a goal, but something about how they move through their world. Let's talk about it in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed because next week we are going to talk about how we build our life that will carry us to that future self. Friend, thank you so much for sharing a piece of your day with me. Stay present, stay kind to yourself, and I will see you soon.